Common Knowledge is brought to you by our friends at Game Grid Midvale, our local game store who puts players first with weekly competitive events, below market pricing, and the best customer service available. Check out their online inventory using the link in our description.
We are also sponsored by inkgaming.com. Use coupon code CCMTG10 at checkout for a 10% discount on all inked gaming supplies and accessories. You can support the show directly through Patreon at patreon.com/common knowledge.
This is the Common Knowledge Podcast. It's not about the cost, it's about the knowledge. Here are your hosts, Brandon Clark and Lauber.
Ready, set, go. Hi, welcome to the podcast. This is episode 89 of the Common Knowledge Podcast. I'm the host of the podcast, Brandon, joined by the co-host of the podcast, Sean, the Lauber.
What is up? I was going to say the word podcast in there too, but I was just like, I can't do it.
In this podcast, we talk about Magic the Gathering, because we're a Magic the Gathering podcast with a focus on the Pauper format and improving you at Magic. That's why you listen to the podcast. It's got nothing to do with anything else, except for that you're 100% here to be hashtag always improving. That's the only reason you would listen to a podcast.
I hate this. I hate this.
Unless it's the Office Ladies podcast, a podcast by Jenna Fisher and Angela Kinsey where they talk about The Office.
I've heard about that.
It's a treasure.
Is it?
They're so pure. Oh
no.
I discovered a ramen podcast.
Okay.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem like I could fill an hour with that, let alone...
You can fill a notebook with ramen notes. You could fill a podcast with it, definitely. I'm going to need a new notebook soon. This is my ramen notebook.
That's what you did this week. I'm not even going to ask.
I've had this notebook for like a year.
I'm excited to get to what I did this week.
What did you do this week? No, okay. You want to know what I did this week?
Sure.
A lot of homework and a lot of finals.
But
now
you're done.
I'm done. Semester is over until January 2nd. I'm free. I'm going to pick up some more hours at work, which will be fun because I like my job. But also, I'm going to play Magic. That is my goal. I'm going to play one league a week from now until January 2nd when the next semester starts.
I need to trade you tickets so you have no excuse not to play. As many tickets as you could ever use.
I'm just so lazy to buy tickets because I got to get my wallet out and type in all the information.
I'll take all that out of it and just give you some of my dirty Slivers winnings. Seriously, I have made so much money playing Slivers. It is stupid.
Oh my gosh. All right. I'll take your dirty money.
But, so I did play about 30 games of Slivers in the past couple weeks. That's a fair bit. But I started seeing a lot of my bad matchups, and I was like, I'm going to jump off of this train. I have enough data that I feel comfortable talking about it. So I started brewing Mill again. It's one of those things where I know it's an unsolvable problem, so I just keep coming back to it, trying to solve it. And I think I've nailed down a list that I think is the best possible thing, and it's still not great, but my win rate in tournament, the tournament practice room is above 60%. That's kind of the standard of where I want to get decks before I try to play them against, like, in an actual league. And if you go on the Facebook and just, heck, if you Google Lobert Mill, the deck does come up. So if you want to look at it, there it is. There's a few slots I'm not happy with, but I've made some serious progress on that, and I'm really proud of myself.
I'm proud of you too. There's no way that I would have ever even thought about trying to do that. Card of the week?
Card of the week.
Card of the week.
All right, this week we have a super special, awesome card of the week. Our card of the week this week is the Time Wizard.
If it's on YouTube, I've had to go and find a a version of this that I can put up and crammed it into our template. It is... What is Time Wizard, Brandon?
Well, the Time Wizard is a dual monster from the Yu-Gi-Oh anime. Probably also exists in the card game, but we're not talking about that because it's not real. But in the anime, it's given to Joey Wheeler by Yugi Moto aboard the ship to Duelist Kingdom because it might come in handy on the island. And oh, sure, boy, does it. Joey Wheeler is facing off against someone in a duel. It's a duel for their life, and one of them's going to go to the shadow world, I bet, if they lose. And then he draws his Time Wizard, and he's glad he has that baby dragon in his deck, because Time Wizard and baby dragon combine to make the 1,000 dragon and win the duel.
It's a 3-card combo with your fusion spell, right?
No,
it's just static.
I guess. I don't know. Does it matter?
Slaps them together, the hologram program figures it out.
There are no rules on that show. It doesn't make any sense. So basically, what cards on the show do is whatever the writers need them to do to progress the plot. That is their special ability, is plot device. Activate it by calling on the heart of the cards and summoning it in attack mode. Time roulette, go!
They have like a rule book, and they open it, it's just like, use your imagination, and they're just like, okay.
Did you just summon 2 monsters in a single turn? Or Exodia? No one summoned him before. Why? Because it's hard or something? No, this game doesn't make any sense. No one can figure out how to do it.
All right, are you ready for the real card of the week? We're not giving away Time Wizards for our Patreon giveaway. We could, but we're not gonna.
Well, I guess you're right, because the card game doesn't exist. So how could we give away something that doesn't exist? All right, so, what's our real card of the week? No more of this tomfoolery.
Our real card of the week is Winding Way. Winding Way is a colorless and a green for a sorcery. It says, choose creature or land, reveal the top 4 cards of your library, put all cards of the chosen type revealed this way into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. Being a card advantage spell in green for 2 mana is just, I think, one of the most amazing things that has been printed in Pauper for a while. Like, that's kind of just astounding to me. This is seeing some play. I want to say less lately than it has been. I guess there's been a recent resurgence thanks to Caleb Gannon. Caleb put this in a cool list that is a Soul Sisters list that has a mono green mana base, but it uses green creatures to produce white mana. It plays a bunch of Soul Sisters, very, very low mana count, and then there's like this merfolk that whenever it's tapped, you make a 1/1 blue merfolk. It just exploits that. Winding Way, the deck building cost of Winding Way is you have to cram a whole bunch of creatures in your deck, but that's where you want to be in a lot of these aggro decks. So hopefully it's a draw 4 in that deck. We're doing Slivers today, and unfortunately, it whiffs a lot more in Slivers, even with 33 creatures, than you would expect it to. Like, in my 30 games, I think I got 5 whiffs. That's a fair bit, but still, the upside is that most of the time it drew me 2 to 4 cards.
So another really big place where this card does see play right now is in Elves. A lot of people are playing it there, but there's also still a fair amount of people who think that you should just be playing Distant Melody in Elves, and I think I am inclined to agree with that. I do see a lot of people, however, just jamming like 10 of these spells into the deck. So like 4 Winding Way, 4 Lead the Stampede, 2 Distant Melodies. And that just seems wrong to me, personally. The experience I had playing with Winding Way and Elves was that it was too fair. It was just too fair for what Elves wanted to be doing. It made the deck like a little bit more consistent, but you just lost those games where you just had those super explosive, like, I drew 30 cards this game and dumped my hand on the board, and now you have no outs. And the slower Winding Way draws would kind of like allow for decks that were pretty removal heavy to kind of keep pace with you.
Mm-hmm.
You just didn't really have that explosiveness that Distant Melody would allow. And like you said too, it's easy to still fizzle. When you think you've got 12 or whatever lands in your elf deck, plus a bunch of these other spells, that's still a pretty high fail rate when the point of your deck is to be at like max capacity in terms of creatures. So me personally, I'm off Winding Way in the elf deck. I like Distant Melody and Lead the Stampede. As far as in a deck like Slivers goes, I think this card's incredible. I'm not super familiar with Caleb Gannon's list, but I'm a big fan of his work. And Winding Way's probably nuts there too.
Yeah, I think one of the problems with slotting this and other cards like it in large numbers into elves is that they are huge tempo hits. You've spent 2 mana and got nothing on the board when you really want to be doing that. So if you have too many, you will have to spend a lot of time like filling your hand, and there will be more cards in your hand in the long term, but you do slow yourself down significantly as well. Like if this was just like, I don't know, I know you're not taking it out, but if this was just a Vanguard in your hand, you'd just be like, sweet, throw down the Vanguard instead of spending all the time. It is a bigger deal in Slivers where mana is a lot harder to get, even with Gemhide.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you're relying on your Slivers to create that mana, you're not attacking, and that's kind of what you want to be doing with Slivers.
Yeah. I guess other notes is that this does dump cards into the graveyard, so there are some synergy potentials with like Tortured Existence. Although Tortured Existence hasn't seen play in some time, there's just brewing potential there, so I thought it's worth it to bring it up.
At least not in the online realm, but Tortured Existence will always be played in paper.
Yeah.
People like that deck. And I think Winding Way is a good inclusion. I mean, it already has a lot of good inclusions. Satyr Wayfinder, Commune with the Gods. So I mean, maybe, I don't know if there's a lot of room left for Winding Way, but
there's enough room that people do flex slots like all the time, and if they just
that's fair, yeah.
Solid slots like this, maybe.
Yeah, cut down on some flex slots and play a couple Winding Ways. Anyway, cool. So that was our real card of the week, Winding Way. We kind of chose this card because we haven't done a green one in a while, and this card is one of the things that has made Slivers more of a contender, which is, surprise, our main topic today.
Main topic.
Thanks, Deep Voice.
Cool. So, Slivers. We answer the question, are Brandon's fists safe? Because for you new listeners, a while back, and by a while back, I don't know, we haven't been doing this show for very long.
It had to be like 50, 60 episodes ago, though.
Yeah, it was early in our podcasting days, around episodes 30-ish. I was just like, really, like, guys, don't play Slivers. It's bad. It's so bad. Don't do it to yourself.
Yeah.
I said at one point that if Slivers ever won a challenge, I would eat my fists. So, Sean, you've been playing the deck. You've got some experience. Are my fists safe, or do I need to start concocting a recipe? My chef skills to the test.
Well, at the time we made the promise, we did caveat it with, if nothing else is printed, and there was a card printed that is, I think, responsible for your fists not being safe. I think Slivers will win a challenge at the current rate.
Wow.
They're pretty good.
Okay.
The card that was printed was Bladeback Sliver, and if you're not familiar, that is a colorless and a red for a 2/2 Sliver. It has the ability of Hellbent. Sliver creatures have tap, deal a damage to target player. The reason that that's a big deal is that people are desperate right now for finding non-combat ways of dealing damage, and it was pretty easy for Slivers. Well, not easy. They did have to slot in some stuff that made it so that they could get to red mana, since they were just Selesnya before, but I think it does smooth out the deck and make it so that, like those Gemhide Slivers, make it so that you can play Winding Way more effectively and Lead the Stampede more effectively. So overall, I think it's just a better deck, and all we lost was like Spinneret Sliver, which is the reach one, and the Vigilance Sliver, Sentinel Sliver.
Yeah, so I mean, kind of just some really inconsequential creatures got pulled out of the deck in place for what is, like you said, really the backbone of this deck's current success.
Yep.
So, that in mind, though, what if Tron doesn't exist and people aren't trying to remove your combats? Is Blade Back Sliver still the threat or still the powerhouse for this deck as you think it is? Do you think this deck is as good without Tron?
Absolutely. Well, okay. They wouldn't play Blade Back Sliver. To answer that part of the question, that card is pretty awful against the entire rest of the meta. Like, the only way you want to use it is if your opponent has big enough creatures that you can't fight them in combat, and that's just about never.
Yeah, you usually have the biggest creatures on the board.
Yeah, and you would have to have a lot of creatures to close out that game anyway. So I do think that it does have a positive Boros matchup. You are just able to refill your hand using these spells more often than your opponent, and your creatures outclass everything that they play. That could keep it in the meta for a while. Like, that's pretty good. Like, if Tron's not the number one deck and you're combining all of the Boros decks together, then yeah, I mean that would be the number one deck next, and it still beats up on that.
Alrighty, well, let's get into the deck list. We're going to start with the mana base. As you talked about, they needed to make some changes to fit red in there for Blade Back. That's kind of non-trivial, thanks to Ash Barrens, sort of the linchpin of a lot of Pauper mana bases. Ash Barrens, for those of you who don't know, taps for a colorless, or it has basic land cycling for one generic. So you discard it and then search your library for a basic land, put it in your hand. And that makes it very, very easy to just go find your mountain.
Usually you're keeping hands that aren't super heavy on lands, and so if you have an Ash Barrens, the first one is probably getting your second color. So the second one is getting your red a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
I did find it difficult finding red. So that's why, like, I'm not going to say cut down on Ash Barrens or anything. Like, they're absolutely necessary.
They're also nice, too, because you can just play them. And there's not a lot of there's no double cost spells in the deck. Everything is X and like a generic and X, right? So if you're in a pinch and you really just need to make that next land drop, you can always just play your Ash Barrens and have access to untapped mana right away. As opposed to like Evolving Wilds, where you're behind on the curve.
That's a really good point. And another difference between this and Evolving Wilds is, since you've been waiting for that red for so long, when you finally draw your Ash Barrens, you get access to it that turn. So you just cycle, play the mountain, and that feels really, really nice.
Yeah, like that's kind of nice too, because Blade Back isn't something you want to be playing on turn 2. This is like the last sliver you play out when you can play it, and if it's the last card in your hand, it has pseudo haste because the rest of your slivers that don't have summoning sickness can just tap right away.
Yep.
Do them. So that's pretty cool. Next up, there's just 2 copies of Blossoming Sands, which is the green and white gain a life land. 7 forests, 1 mountain, 6 plains. So very straightforward, simple mana base.
Yep. And just the Blossoming Sands is important as being that. Instead of like a Terramorphic Expanse or anything, because this is it can be color intense, where you need 2 green sources or 2 white sources pretty often. So like these really help with those turns.
Do you think there's a consideration to having more copies of Blossoming Sands, or is the come into play tapped too much of a liability that you don't want?
I think the mana base is perfect, and I wouldn't change a thing. Like you aren't aggro deck, tap lanes hurt.
Cool. Alrighty, so that's the mana base. Now we'll get into the creatures. So we've got 4 Blade Back Slivers, which, as we talked about, is sort of currently the backbone, the linchpin of this deck that's allowing it to have the success that it is in a format where attacking isn't that good.
So with Bladeback Sliver, I did find that you don't want to sandbag lands or anything. You just basically play out a land every turn that you get one. Sometimes you don't have it and you're not considering that, and then all of a sudden you're just like, oh, in 2 turns I can actually play this and activate it. So just play out all your lands as quickly as you can. You're not bluffing anybody. Nobody's afraid of Slivers doing something tricky. I guess they could be, but they go for it anyway. I did find a kind of a neat trick with Ash Barrens, Lead the Stampede, and Winding Way. If you hold priority while you're casting these, and they're the last card in your hand, there's a moment where you don't have any cards in your hand, and you can go ahead and activate a whole bunch of your Slivers, and then you let the Lead the Stampede resolve, or whatever, resolve, of course. So I have been able to, I have an Ash Barrens in my hand, and I can't play it this turn, so I pass turn, and then, on their end step, I can just be cycle, hold priority, tap all my Slivers, do a bunch of damage that they're not expecting.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty cool trick, and one that I hadn't thought of, so there's there's the common knowledge for y'all. Hold priority. Get your pings in. Some other good things this card has going for it is just on its own, it has 2 toughness. We kind of said earlier how it's kind of useless. We say that because when pinging isn't important, I don't know, if you have 6 Slivers out, the 6 damage you're going to get in with pinging isn't as important as the fact that your Slivers are probably all 4/4s or 5/5s or just something outrageous, right? And so you're just better off attacking. But what's nice about Slivers is the Sliver effect, right? Everything gets all the things. So, even when this card isn't great, it's still a 2/2 for 2 that's going to get pumped and get all the other great abilities of your other Slivers. So it's not like a completely dead card.
That does make it the largest creature in your deck, because even the Lords become 2/2s, and this would be a 3/3.
Yeah, everything else is a 1/1. Boom. Big
but,
boy.
We said earlier...
Back. It's so hard to say.
Bladeback?
Wizards of the Coast for making this card. Bladeback. It's like Clark Clan. I can't say that word ever. Clark.
Oh, that one's pretty bad.
Clark Cran, Braidbrack Slivers.
It's Crayon.
Clark Crayon.
Everybody in Utah says crayon instead of crayon. And so there's always people that walk around correcting literally everyone.
I think they say kren, like a kren.
I knew someone that said crown.
Oh, gosh. Oh, Bobby, why? All right, what's the next creature on our list?
It is Gemhide Sliver. So Gemhide Sliver is a colorless and a green for a 1/1 Sliver. It gives all of your Slivers the ability to tap and add any color to your mana pool.
This is my favorite Sliver.
And it's amazing in this.
Sliver Queen is my favorite Sliver.
That's not Pauper.
It's not. I now that we're talking about Slivers, I just remember how much I regret selling all my Sliver Queens when they spiked up to super expensive. I wish I would have given one.
You'll buy them again.
I will.
I've known you to impulse buy many a Sliver Queen.
You have.
But Gemhide Sliver it's in there because of the you need red, but it's not as simple as that. It's also you want this to be able to play more Lead the Stampedes and Winding Ways. There was a while where the Selesnya version of the deck was just playing Lead the Stampedes or just playing Winding Ways, and with this it feels really, really good to play both, so you can just keep refilling your hand. But just being able to double spell, or you play Sliver turn 1, play this turn 2, play another turn or another 1-cost Sliver, and then you're off to the races after that. That's really, really good.
Oh yeah. Next card in the deck is the only one of.
Yeah.
Everything else is 4s. 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 1. 1 Hunter Sliver. So Hunter Sliver is a white and a red. It's a 1/1, or a generic and a red.
Thank you.
You know what I meant.
No.
Yeah, you did.
I did.
It's a generic and a red for a 1/1 Sliver. Surprise. Has Provoke.
And everybody knows what Provoke is, so we'll move on. Just kidding. I'll explain Provoke. When a creature with Provoke attacks, you can target a creature, and that creature must block it.
It provokes.
Yeah, and also you may untap that creature. So somebody attacks with their creature, you're like, hey, you're not done yet. Untap them. You're blocking my Sliver now. My Sliver's giant. Haha. So it's like their one removal card. It really can change an entire game by drawing it a little bit later, which is kind of why I think that it's okay for it to just be a 1-of in the main. Spoiler, there's more on the side. Just wiping the board, like over the course of seriously one turn, I've wiped the board pretty often with this guy. So this is our last red Sliver. So 4 copies of the blade back, and then 1 copy of this, and that's all the red in the deck.
Yeah, and again, like you said, this card synergizes really, really well with basically just all your other Slivers, to the point where if you're in a matchup where combat is really relevant, this card is just going to kind of be like a total game changer. Like, it's going to be the card that you're kind of both in a board stall, and then this comes down, and you get to just eat your opponent's best creatures.
Yeah, a lot of the time they will throw like additional creatures in there so that they can get some kind of value out of having to block, but at the very least you force some bad blocks. If you have a lot of creatures attacking, they have nothing left to stack block with.
Yeah, you're kind of in a position where you get to basically just craft combat however you want.
Exactly.
And that's pretty good. Dare I say optimal. Capital O, capital P, capital T, capital I, capital M, capital A, capital L.
Jeez. And then we're coming up on some pretty simple ones. We've got a 4-of Muscle Sliver. It is one of the lords, and by lord we mean it gives all Slivers +1/+1. So it is a 1/1. Its effect makes it a 2/2, and then all of your other Slivers get that buff as well. And of course this stacks. There's all in all 12 copies of this card, because Predatory Sliver and Sinew Sliver are also lords. The Muscle and the Predatory Sliver are both green, and then the Sinew Sliver is white. The only difference between these cards is that Sinew and Muscle Sliver are symmetrical effects, so they will buff your opponent's Slivers, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, that is sort of the one downside of using any of the core set Slivers. I guess Wizards tried to... Alright, no, I'm confused. Okay, old Slivers are symmetrical. Core set Slivers are not.
Yeah.
They made them more OP.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I knew I was, like, confused about something there for a minute. It's like, wait, this doesn't sound right. I'm just talking out of my rear right now.
But these are the backbone of your deck.
Yeah, this is the meat and the potatoes of the Slivers deck. It's the core.
That's how you have a board of 7 5/5s. Like, effectively, turn 1 you played a 5/5 because eventually it became a 5/5. I know that's flawed logic, but at the end of the day, that's what you end up with.
Yeah. All right. Our next Sliver. This is the only 1 mana Sliver in the deck, right?
There's 2 others actually.
So this is one of 3 Slivers that are 1 mana in your deck. Plated Sliver. So this is just a single white mana for a 1/1 that gives an extra point of toughness to all Slivers. It's
like half of a lord. Like, honestly, the better half of a lord, because it pumps up that toughness, so burn spells are going to have a tougher time getting through your Slivers, and then combat, your Slivers are more likely to live, even if they're less likely to trade. You know, if this was like a power that it added, I would rather keep my Slivers around. That's kind of the name of the game here, is to just build up that critical mass.
And this is one of those Slivers that really works well in tandem with Hunter Sliver. Like, if you can make sure that your Slivers have the bigger toughness, you can usually set blocks in a way that are pretty favorable for you.
Yeah, for 1 mana, that's some value.
Oh yeah, much value.
Next, there's Sidewinder Slivers. So this is also a single white. It is a 1/1 sliver. It gives all of your slivers flanking. Flanking, if you're not aware, is when this attacks, if it becomes blocked, the blocking creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn. So in combat, it's basically a lord, like a 1/1 difference. That makes a huge, like, that's huge. It can even be better if your opponent wants to stack block. It gives all of the creatures -1/-1.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing here from Sidewinder Sliver is outside of just like making combat difficult, it invalidates a lot of blocks.
Yeah.
There's a lot of X1 creatures right now in this format with, fairy decks kind of starting to rise up again, other elf decks, whatever. There's a lot of creatures that just straight can't block if Sidewinder Sliver's in play.
Yeah, they can chump, but they are just chumping. They can't stack really effectively. So that's again a lot of value out of just a 1-cost creatures, and flanking stacks. So if you have 2 of these, blocking creatures will get -2/-2.
Okay, and the last sliver in the deck is Virulent Sliver. So this is like the alternate win condition of the deck. It's a single green mana for a 1/1, gives all of your slivers poison 1, which, for those who don't know, is basically the same thing as Infect, just in terms of damage dealt to an opponent. It doesn't put -1 counters on creatures. It just gives your opponent a poison counter, which is basically the same thing as an Infect counter.
Yeah, it doesn't scale with the power of your creature. It's just, if it deals combat damage to them, they get a poison counter. And that's in addition to the normal damage that it does, whereas an Infect creature only does its Infect damage.
Yeah. The poison also stacks, so you have 4 Virulent Slivers out. Your sliver will deal poison 4. So you'll get 4 poison counters. It's just an alternate win condition.
I won with this one game out of the 30 matches that I played. One of those, this actually worked. And it was just because I couldn't find any lords, and I was able to, I think I had a bunch of flanking slivers and plated slivers. So my guys were 1/3s with poison 2. And so they were able to attack through. They couldn't block them effectively, and then they just poisoned them out of the game. My big question to myself when after my 3rd league, I had noticed that these were just, am I better playing a metallic sliver?
Yeah, they're kind of redundant in that because they don't scale with the power of the creature like Infect does, it's almost just not making things faster for you, if that makes sense. The thing about Infect is your creature only has to deal 10 damage.
Mm-hmm.
But Poisonous, you have to connect with 10 creatures unless you have multiple Virulent Slivers out. But with your creatures being so big, 4/4s and 5/5s, it kind of seems negligible. I don't know. I've seen people play this deck, and it's they deal 10 poison as they're dealing their 20th damage or whatever, or they're just dealing 20 damage before they're hitting 10 poison because their creatures are bigger anyway and they outpace the poison.
Yeah, I ended up, I believe that it's better to have the Virulent Slivers, but I'm not 100% sure on that. The reason being, I think that people end up having to prioritize killing this at some point. Otherwise, just all of your little guys will also win the game.
I think there's a couple things going.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is that the only upside that Metallic Sliver has is being colorless and just being super easy to cast off off your mana. Otherwise, there's no reason not to play any other sliver because Metallic Sliver doesn't do anything. It's just a 1/1 sliver for 1. It doesn't have an effect that is symmetrical with the other slivers. It just gets boosted by your other slivers, which is what Sidewinder Sliver does. But Sidewinder Sliver just has an effect. And so I think that this deck, one, just wanted another 1-drop, And 2, the upside of having a Sliver with an ability is just so much higher than having a Sliver that you can cast off any of your basic lands, that I just don't really know if there's another slot. Like Sidewinder Sliver is just kind of the last slot.
You mean Virulent?
Yeah, what did I say?
Sidewinder. Sidewinder's great. That's the flanking one. But
they're all 5/5s with Poisonous 1, flanking, provoke.
And they can generate mana.
Yeah, that can tap to add any color of mana.
But I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that people do end up making that change. Like, the poison is not that impactful, and being able to double spell on turn 3 more often is pretty impactful. But and it's kind of a hard thing to figure out, like, well, did my opponent play differently because they had to kill the Virulent Sliver? I know that they prioritized those when they could have killed Plated Slivers. I don't know. But I'm going to keep the Virulent Slivers in my deck.
All right, so those are all of the creatures. Next, we're going to move on to the instants and the sorceries. And then we'll just close out by touching on the sideboard, and then we can go into matchups.
Yeah.
Boom. Cool. So this deck, pretty simple. 7 instants and sorceries, 3 copies of Lead the Stampede, and 4 Winding Way.
So Lead the Stampede is the 2 and a green sorcery. Look at the top 5 cards of your library, put any creatures into your hand, and then we covered Winding Way already. So this is their ability to refill, and these are really enabled by the Gemhide Sliver really, really well. Just a little tip when you're playing these is that you do want to play these as the last card out of your hand. You want to set up and get tempo and have the ability to drop more mana so that you can do one of these and cast another spell in the same turn. Like, pretty much every time it's worth it to play the Sliver, the existing Slivers you have first.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, this card goes really well in tandem with Gemhide Sliver in the deck. What you're saying falls into that philosophy of Gemhide is going to allow for your most explosive, unfair draws with Lead the Stampede. And so you just want to acquire that critical mass of Slivers so that you can just be like, have tons of mana, cast a Lead the Stampede, play a ton more elves, and you're okay that you took a turn off using your Slivers as mana sources, because your board is now just so huge that it doesn't matter that you gave your opponent another turn. Like, they're probably dead.
Yeah.
All right. Let's jump into the sideboard. Is this your sideboard, or is this just a generic?
No, this is one I copied out of the top 8 of a challenge. I would not have designed the sideboard like this. We'll get to that after we actually go through it.
All right. Let's just go through it. So there are 3 copies of Gorilla Shaman, 4 copies of Hallow, 2 more copies of Hunter Sliver, 3 Prismatic Strands, and 3 Standard Bearer. So should we just start from the top? Gorilla Shaman?
Yeah.
You give us your thoughts, your insights, if you would change this card, if you wouldn't play this card, whatever.
Okay.
Go.
Gorilla Shaman, you can find it off Lead the Stampede and Winding Way, so there's not going to be a better artifact hate spell. Pretty simple. Like, I didn't think that I needed more enchantment hate or anything, so this Gorilla Shaman and the things it does is so cool that, yeah, let's leave that one.
Cool. So Gorilla Shaman, keep it in, unless they print Harmonic Sliver at common.
That's not Pauper. I don't know what that does, therefore.
Oh, you know what Harmonic Sliver does. Think back to those late nights at Denny's when...
It's got to blow up artifacts or enchantments from context clues. I don't remember if it's ETB or sacrifice.
It's whenever a sliver comes into play, blow up a thing.
Okay, yeah, that's bonkers.
Maybe it is sacrifice. I don't remember now. I've blown up many of your artifact, though, with Harmonic Sliver.
We can't leave the people wanting. Harmonic Sliver. All slivers have, when this creature comes into play, destroy target artifact or enchantment. And it's already an uncommon, so just bump it down. No, just kidding. That would destroy everything.
Would it, though?
Yes. That would be so good.
It really would. Okay.
Like, you know how I said this would be good against Boros decks? Imagine that, plus the Journey to Nowheres, and the lands get exploded. Now, off the top of your head, can you say what Hallow does?
Okay. Hallow is 2 and a green for a sorcery. Um, it sacks a land and then goes and gets 2 more lands.
That's Harrow.
Oh, Harrow. Okay. Nope, I don't know what Hallow does. I was so curious because in Sean's show notes, in the show notes here, Sean's got Hallow. Burn can be hard since they point removals at your lords and do constant damage with pingers. And so I'm like, what does this have to do with burn? But I was thinking of a completely different card.
Okay, so Hallow is a single white. It says prevent all damage target spell would deal this turn. You gain life equal to the damage prevented this way. So basically, it's a spell to save your slivers while at the same time gaining you life. And like Brandon spoiled with my notes, burn's tough. And 4 sideboard slots a lot of the time isn't even enough.
Yeah, little creature decks struggle against burn, like all of them. Elves, Slivers is probably no exception. You know, it takes a few turns for Slivers to get off the ground because you don't have 1 mana acceleration. So you're really just playing a 1 mana Sliver on turn 1 and a 2 mana Sliver on turn 2. And if that was Gemhide Sliver, then you get to play another 1/1 Sliver, 1 mana Sliver. But
all of your guys are 1 power tough or 1 power dudes at that point.
Yeah, and Searing Blaze is such a punishing effect for decks that are trying to get off the ground with their creatures. You know, it's just it's tough for elves, it's tough for slivers, it's tough.
Burn's not opposed to just being like, oh, you have 1 lord, lightning bolt. I'll draw more. I ain't scared. You only have 12 of those. I have like 30 of these. Next, there's 2 copies of Hunter Sliver. These are the Provoke Sliver. It's if you're going against a matchup that removal is important, like fairies or something, or elves, this is what you want. I think even against Stompy, these are pretty good. Your Bladeback Slivers are coming out in a lot of these matchups, and there's room. However, against elves, you untap their creature with Provoke, and then they just use Birchfloor Ranger or the creature's own ability to tap themselves again. So it's not that effective, unfortunately. Like, you have to have this while they have Summoning Sickness, or they don't have the other guy, which is... it's awkward against elves. That's a nigh unwinnable matchup, I want to say.
Yeah. Elves does really, really well against anything trying to be fair that doesn't have interaction. I should preface that because Boros does pretty well against elves-ish. But yeah, so that's Hunter's Sliver. The next card, we've got 3 Prismatic Strands. So we all kind of know what Prismatic Strands does, right?
Yeah.
2 and a white, prevent the damage from a source. All damage from a color, and then it has flashback, tap a white creature. So anything where they're trying to attack you back or deal you mass amounts of damage, Prismatic Strands can be really, really powerful. It's really, really good against burn.
2 for 1 'em.
Yeah, 2 for 1 'em. And it's a huge tempo hit, too. Of just like if you cast Prismatic Strands in response to a thing, and they just can't do anything else.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so they're done casting for that turn. I get it, okay.
Casting spells this turn. And then when it's in the graveyard, they just always have to live in fear of, well, I can't do anything now. Like, they have to, like, sit and sandbag and try to set up a turn where they have a bunch of instants and try to, like, bait it out of you and so that they can respond with, like, burn spell.
Yeah, the Prismatic Strands have a lot of applications. It won me some Stompy games and some Boggle games. Burn was still tough. And then our last card is Standard Bearer, the 1 and a white for a 1/1 creature that if something can target a creature, it has to target Standard Bearer. I made the mistake in my first couple games of boarding these in against Stompy. PSA, not good against Stompy anymore. The number of fight spells that they have access to just means it's just a good target to die and whatever you're taking out is going to have more value. They're good against boggles, though.
Yes, they are. They're very good against the Boggly boys. I don't know. Maybe it's different because the only experience I have with Standard Bearer against Stompy is coming from like Boros and like the Jeskai Ephemerate Astrolabe deck. And it's probably a different story when you have removal, that you can respond to that fight spell.
Yeah.
But I found...
And counter spells.
Yeah, and counter spells, obviously, yeah. But I just... if you can not have them draw a fight spell, then... Oh, man. Standard Bearer is really good against Stompy.
Yeah, well, yeah. If you can protect it...
Yeah.
The story's going to change, but just in your... like weird white weenie deck or something, not so much.
I think in the case of Slivers, yeah, Sean, you're right. It's not nearly as effective because it just sucks up that one removal spell. And I mean, Slivers is a super synergistic deck. Like, it's very synergy based, and you're taking out something to make room for these 1/1s for 2 mana that aren't Slivers.
Bladeback Sliver.
Yeah. I mean, you're still losing Sliver synergies.
Yeah.
As this 1/1 could be a Bladeback Silver, which could potentially just be a 4/4 and be bigger than anything that Stompy could be fighting anyway at the time. So there's an opportunity cost anytime you're sideboarding with this deck of like anything you put in needs to be very, very potent.
Yeah.
You're losing a lot of power and a lot of synergy from your deck to do so.
But man, these are such a house against boggles, and even if they're like packing those gut shots or whatever, you board in these and some number of prismatic strands. If you can dig to a Standard Bearer or something, it makes racing just the easiest thing in the world. And then the prismatic strands, if you didn't get your Standard Bearer early, you would just blank them for a few turns, and that's enough to swing in with all of your, I don't know, 5/5s.
Yeah. All right. Well, we have kind of already started touching on it a little bit with our sideboard talk, but do you want to dive into some matchups? We'll just kind of go through a few of the big matchups that you should expect to encounter, and really we'll just be kind of getting a lot of input from Sean. These are all matchups that he has a little bit of data on from his playtesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So boom, let's get into it.
So with Boros, I already touched on this. You can overwhelm them pretty easy, and there's no coming back once you're ahead. Like, once you're ahead with Slivers, they're just too big. Even if they are able to get 1 or 2 off the field, who cares? They just used like 3 for 1 to themselves to get them off the field. Even if they're prismatic strandsing you, you're probably so ahead since you're faster than them and you're just playing dudes that I didn't have any problems with that matchup. Thoughts before I go to Tron?
No. Boros is one of those decks where it does have the removal that it can keep pace with decks like this, but cards like Winding Way and Lead the Stampede have, I think, skewed the numbers in favor of those decks against Boros. Boros can kill all your threats, and then you just top deck Elite the Stampede, and you're right back in the game.
Yeah, they kill your lords, and then your little dudes have poison or something stupid.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a backup.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk a little bit about Tron.
I still had a hard time with Tron.
That's just the story of Pauper right now.
Yeah.
Oh, no, it's not. Tron's insane.
It was better than Stompy, though. I think it was more resilient. Stompy goes in really hard on one creature, and then the rest of them are like 2/2s. If they start doing the Denrova horror loop, they really have to get a lot of Slivers off the board before you're like gutted. So I was able to just keep the pressure on and get more of those games where I was able to just like, okay, the pressure's on. You're going to run out one day. Okay, here we go. Attack you for 45. Because they gave me so much time and they weren't interacting until then. Even with a Denrova horror. Like, okay, play Denrova horror. Flicker my Denrova horror and my dignitary. Okay, pass. and I'm just like, okay, I was sandbagging a guy, so replay my guy. The bladeback slivers, you can still, even if you have those, they can still Denrova horror them, of course. You don't have any relics in the sideboard, and I think playing off of the resiliency of like your board still being around and just wanting to stop that loop when they do find a mnemonic wall, I would want to play off of that a little bit more if I was expecting a lot of those kinds of decks. I'd just be shaving some numbers, like 2 Gorilla Shamans is probably fine. And then, oh man, Hunter Sliver was pretty good. Maybe 1 Prismatic Strands. So go down to 2 Prismatic Strands, 2 Gorilla Shaman, and then you have a couple of relics in your board just for that matchup. But I wasn't actually able to win a game against Tron when I had, like, when they, by pinging them. That never happened. Like, either I just had a big board, or they cast Weather the Storm. It just didn't happen. I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, though. Decks are trying to adjust and find ways to attack Tron that isn't combat, because Stonehorde Dignitary is such a powerful card in that deck with Ghostly Flicker and just like getting them to that late game. But you shouldn't forget that Tron still has a lot of other resiliency and a lot of other tools. You know, between Moment's Peace, between
Denrova horror, Weather the Storm, yeah.
You know, and even just doing simple things. They against a deck like this, they can just Muldrift or Ephemerate with no fear. Get a ton of cards, chump block, stay alive. I mean, this deck just has so many powerful tools that even if you do have a really powerful way to fight them, you're still only fighting them on one axis, where this deck attacks on so many.
Yeah, you've upped it to 2 axes with your non-combat damage, but there was a couple of times when I had the blade back in my hand and they were at like 3, but I could not find red. Like, I was just sitting there hoping to find it, and it just wouldn't show up, and I lost. Like, they were able to just like, okay, got my loop online, I have 18 mana, Denrova horror, like, do that enough times, you are gutted. Like, it took a few turns for them, and I was just like, please, red. No, didn't happen. Died. So I think it could get there. Nah.
Yeah, I mean, not to mention, even if you did find a red, who's to say that there wasn't just like a prohibit waiting?
Yeah.
Tron just has so many tools. It's just so hard to fight it. Even when you do find ways, you know, to effectively attack them, it's kind of just like, well, you had the Blade Black Sliver draw, but you know, they just had other tools to deal with you, and you weren't able to get through. You know, it's just a tough deck.
Yeah.
No matter what.
But yeah, this felt better than Stompy. I think that's a good takeaway. Blue Delver. Counter spells really hurt, since your powerful spells or your important spells are pretty obvious. Like, they go for the lords, they go for the ladies. I mean, the draw spells, your cards that you use to refill, and then you're left with something pretty non-threatening. You can't affect their fairy count or their ability to like bounce things with Ninja of the Deep Hours, so you can get fairy locked. That's not uncommon.
This is a matchup where Spellsetter Sprite is very, very effective.
Yeah.
You know, all your spells are very low cost. It's trivial to set up turns where you could just counter anything they play with Spellsetter Sprite. I mean, with the exception of Lead the Stampede, sometimes it's tricky to get that third fairy, but it's tough. I will say, though, I think that this is one matchup that benefited a lot from the Daze banning. Daze was really rough on Slivers. You know, as the Delver player, having means of advancing my board, like, not just having to hold mana up.
Yeah.
If Slivers was able to get a little bit ahead of me, was really, really strong in the matchup. And without that, I do think that things have improved.
Things like Lead the Stampede, where it's pretty expensive. You're way safer now trying to play something like that.
Yeah.
One more bad.
One more thing on days, that just might have been a completely silly comment because I think everything improved.
Yeah.
Why is my days losing? So, I mean, I'm sure like everyone can go like, yeah, everything improved with days, but I think that this matchup in particular, like the deck is constrained on mana, like we've talked about. You don't always have very many lands. You don't always have the Gemhide Sliver with a bunch of extra slivers. And I guess at the time of days, like Gemhide Sliver just wasn't even being played in the deck because
right,
doing the Blade Black thing, Blade Back thing. So that wasn't even like in the conversation at all. So days was just really powerful in the context of this deck being limited on mana, so it was nice to counter. And again, like I said, the Delver player being able to commit to the board and still interact on the stack. So I think that even though, everyone can probably make an argument, this matchup really improved for Slivers without having days.
Yeah, where it's like something like Boros, it wouldn't affect so much because like you're casting your core Skyfisher with a bunch of mana up, and then you're casting a Prophetic Prism that's redundant, and they're not going to spend that resource countering something so trivial. Just like with the way you have to sequence your spells, I guess. But I have one last negative point on this matchup, but I do want to say it's a positive one. A positive matchup overall. The negative point is that their bounce spells really affect combat. Like a lot. Like, okay, I can do this amount of damage, or I can attack through. They're 2/2. Things are rough because they've countered my guys. I'm finally able to resolve a Lord. Let's go. And then all of a sudden it's just like snap, and you're just like, F. I'm losing so many slivers.
Yeah. And it's not like normally when you think of a bounce spell and you go, okay, so if I make these attacks here, or if you're trying to think in terms of lethal, all you have to do is subtract the power of the creature that would get bounced. Whereas with this, it's like if you have 6 slivers and they bounce a Lord, you're losing 6 power worth of attackers.
Yikes. Yeah. And then it's like, okay, well now you're in mutagenic range. They block with something, mutagenic it. I've just lost a second Lord. Okay, now I've lost. So you do have to stay back a little bit more to respect those things, or play out a spell that they have to counter so that they're not going to have that snap. But this overall is a good matchup because every sliver you resolve pretty much is going to outclass anything that's blocking it. So it is a race that you can win easily. Like, you play a 1/1 sliver with flanking, that's going to beat or trade every creature in their deck except for Spire Golem. If you have a plated sliver and a flanking sliver, you beat everything. One Lord does quite a bit. Yeah, they just don't have as many counter spells as you have threats, because everything ends up being a pretty big threat to them. So it's just easy to win races.
So the next matchup that we want to talk about is Stompy. And you kind of already touched on, you think that Stompy is a worse matchup. Probably one of its worst matchups?
It felt really, really bad, and I was very surprised by that. And I'm still so surprised that I'm like, maybe my data is flawed, maybe what I've experienced isn't normal, but I'll tell you why I ended up losing most of my games against Stompy. They are able to make one creature so large and unblockable, you can't win the race. Vault Scourge, if they start pumping that up, there's no way on earth you're going to be able to race a creature with lifelink that you can't block. You don't have Spinneret Sliver or anything to give your creatures reach. If they have a Skargan Pitskulk, again, you're not blocking that ever. And then, if that wasn't enough, and I don't think that alone would be enough, the Curian Rangers are amazing against you, because whatever their giant threat is, it plays double duty because now it can block, and this Sliver deck doesn't have any combat spells, so they know exactly what they can and can't block, and they can make that choice, and they come down faster than you. Like, they attack a little bit quicker. I want to say that you catch up around turn 4-ish, and you have as much or more power at that point. But before that, they're just able to resolve 1-mana 2/2s, where you might be doing 2-mana 1/1s or something that will later get buffed. I don't know. So you outclass the creatures, but not one of them, and that's a big enough problem that that this has felt negative to me.
I think the other big thing is Savage Swipe is
of course
very good in this matchup.
Yeah.
Because in a lot of other matchups, it's kind of just like, well, I'll Savage Swipe this to get it out of the way, and then they're just going to replace it with another creature or whatever. It's like if it was Glinthawk, or not Glinthawk, Core Skyfisher, it's like, well, I got the Skyfisher out of the way, but they still got a ton of value out of it, and so I still feel kind of behind. With Slivers, you just Savage Swipe their Lord, like Savage Swipe that key Sliver, and all of a sudden, even if they have 2 or 3 other creatures in play, all of a sudden you don't care about their board anymore. And it's just sort of one of the downsides of Slivers, is it's very easy to just target what's important on the board, and that has a profound impact on the rest of their board state. And that makes Savage really potent in this matchup.
You do have the silver bullet of, like, they're boarding into more epic confrontations for your lords and stuff, but you can board into prismatic strands, and that just makes you win the race. Like, done. You're just winning that race. So it kind of just comes down to, like, draw dependency like that, and they just have more often a good draw. Next, I have elves. Absolutely awful. Horrendous, bad. I stopped playing Slivers because I knew there were 2 elves players in the queue at that time, and chances were too high that I would play them, and I won 1 game, and it felt like the luckiest thing I ever did, and I lost 5 games against elves, and they weren't close.
Yeah, from my experience playing elves, I think I said this earlier, but anything being fair and not interacting is just a buy for elves, barring some acts of God. You go wider faster, your creatures get bigger faster. These decks can't ever beat Well-Wisher.
Yep.
Yeah, you're donezo.
The only games I won was when I found a Hunter Sliver, and they didn't find a Birchlore Ranger. Because if they find a Birchlore Ranger, they can just tap any untapped elves that you decide to provoke. The only case in which you get any of them is if there's an odd number that you untap, and then you also have to be careful, because if any of them have their own tap abilities, like, there's just no way. They have a Birchlore Ranger, your only avenue of winning, which is Hunter Sliver, doesn't work at all anymore, and you lose.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of a big problem, is the creatures that aren't going to get tapped down by Birchlore Ranger just have tap abilities that you don't want to untap. Like, I'm not going to provoke their Well-Wisher. I'm not going to provoke their Timberwatch Elf.
Yeah. That's true.
I wouldn't. I'd block. Oh, you provoked my Timberwatch Elf? Okay, I'll block.
Yeah, it has to be at the exact right moment of the game when it's like they play their Timberwatch Elf, they don't have that Ranger, and you're able to attack and clear it off the board. They also have Lead the Stampede and some other draw spell, so they're more likely to get that spell than you are to get your Hunter Slippers.
Yeah, I think this is one of those matchups where the sideboard's going to come in really handy. If you rip a Standard Bearer and they don't find a removal spell for the Standard Bearer, you can do some serious damage to them.
Yeah.
You still have a lot of those other problems to deal with, like Well-Wisher, but at least you're turning off some of their main win conditions.
It's just Timberwatch Elf, right?
Carrion Ranger, Timberwatch Elf.
Yeah. That Elvish Vanguard, you have the same problem you have with Stompy, where you have the Carrion Ranger that can untap it, and so it can still attack every turn, and it's just bigger than any single sliver.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, there's so many things that can go wrong. Anyway, I think people get it.
Let's just talk about our last matchup, and then we'll wrap up the show.
So this is another bad one. Burn. no way of interacting with their pingers. They just, if they need to, start pointing bolts at your lords. Their thermal alchemists are effective blockers. Like, they're pretty effective blockers when they can keep you off of lords that give them 3 power. So that's pretty hard. Searing Blaze is a real magic card that people can put in their decks, and it has a weird, it's like honestly one of the best things to Hallow. Like, you gain 6 and prevent their damage. It's the best card in their deck you can Hallow, but Hallow alone doesn't do enough, and then you're also losing tempo because you're leaving up a white when it's important.
I don't really have anything to add to that. I mean, pretty straightforward. They kill your important lords, and it's really not a big deal for them because you only have so many lords, and they have a lot more burn spells than you do.
But all in all, I think this is a good deck. I mean, I think the Tron matchup is good enough. I almost want to say positive. Almost. It's good enough. Boros is good. I ended up with a 56% win rate in leagues. You're not going to get that high of a win rate in a challenge, of course, but it's still good. I recommend this deck. Do you want to get out of here?
Yeah, let's wrap it up.
End times.
All right, well, that's the show. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Common Knowledge. Again, big thank you to all of our great sponsors at inkgaming.com and GameGrid Midvale. Check out their online store in the link below, and don't forget about that coupon code CCMTG10, good for a 10% discount on all Ink Gaming supplies and accessories. You can find the show on puremtgo.com, as well as the Constructed Criticism YouTube channel. You can also send us an email if you'd like to at commonknowledgemtg@gmail.com. We love your emails. We love reading them. You can find the show on Twitter at CKPodcastMTG, as well as our ever-growing Facebook group, Common Knowledge. And Sean, where can the listeners find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Lobbert8, that is Lobbert and the number 8, as well as YouTube. You can find me if you just search for Lobbert. I have videos of me playing Pauper, usually Pauper Leagues there, so check that out.
Boom, and you can find me also on Twitter at bclark_CK. Thank you so much for listening, and see you next time.
Bye.
Bye forever.